Peace, everybody. In the last couple of recordings in the Pillage Plunder Prodigy series, I was elaborating on how the Greeks and the Hebrews have a matriarchal connection to Egypt through the god Min, M-I-N, the quote-unquote Ithaphalic god, and it's reflected in their lore, mythology, however you want to refer to it. I wanted to kind of give some more details, not only from my personal insights, but from certain scriptural references and so forth. The region from Canaan inland all the way to Sumer and northward up to the border of the Hittite kingdom was, in my opinion, Ta-Nehisi, an extension of Egypt. Egypt had annexed that far up, probably as far as the 3rd millennium BC, probably earlier, because there's some older artifacts. The oldest artifact from that region is like a broken off piece of a statue or bas relief, I forget which one, but it has a man's hand holding an ankh. And you know that the Egyptian nobles were always shown holding this ankh down at their side with their hand inside the loop, like as if they're using it as a handle. And this thing dates back to about 8,000 BC. So this is way before, the usual estimates of how far Egypt even goes back. They say that the dynastic period only goes back to about 4,000 BC. There's been some recent discoveries in light of the fact that the Shemsu Haru, or the Shemsu Hor, which is thought to be a mythological line of kings by Egyptologists, turns out that they're probably a real dynasty that might go back to about 16,000 BC. I'll get back to that later. But the point about Canaan, Syro-Palestine, the southern portion of Anatolia, midway to Sumer, all being part of Egypt, is because if you look at the nomes, like a nome is a district that Egypt had certain patron deities, Neteru, over, and in those regions you had these temples and schools that were devoted to those principles. For instance, if a place was called Pa-Tehuti, Tehuti, or Thoth, represents wisdom in terms of math and writing and record keeping, science, astronomy, astrology, all these sorts of things. So if you lived in that place, you would probably be a part of some guilds that where you learned those kinds of practices, and so would your family. And you would have a theophoric name, which is a name that's based on a deity that probably contained Thoth in it in some form or fashion. So I said all that to say this, that a lot of the quote-unquote Israelite cities, if you break them down in their oldest archaic roots, they are Egyptian names of the cities. Those are Egyptian nomes. Even Shechem, which is where the Israelites were supposedly made their covenant with God after they got through kicking ass and taking names under Joshua. They came and made a covenant with God at Shechem. Shechem is an Egyptian name. Shechem is a pharaonic name dating to the 3rd and 2nd millennium BC. There are pharaohs with the theophoric name of Shechem. Shechem is a high honorific spiritual term, and it means like an ascended master, someone who's a master of spirituality, who has integrity, who is a spiritual and moral leader. It is the ultimate mystical power. So some bore the title Shechem. There's Shechem Enhat. I have the list of some pharaohs who have that name. I don't need to go through those right now. But this is also where Abraham was said to have brought his 3,000 servants and made a covenant with God that involved circumcision as a sign of some sort of the, they weren't even called Israelites or Hebrews back then, but a sign of Abraham's line and his faith. So it kind of insinuates that God invented circumcision right there in this town district of Shechem. But actually, it's the Egyptians who founded Shechem. So if you want to put it into a historical context, it's probably more like Abraham, whoever he may or may not have been historically, came to Shechem, and to integrate into the Egyptian culture, they were circumcised. You can take it or not, believe it or not. It's nothing that, it's not a life or death matters. It's not written in stone. Just my observations based on what I know about the meanings of these names. Now I want to get back to the point that the region was called Ta-Nehesi, and that the Exodus is a complete myth. It's a legendary writing. It's not found in any of the ancient writings, and it doesn't even occur in Israelite or quote unquote Hebrew writings until the post-exilic period. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. According to the Bible, the Israelites were being rebellious, and God allowed some of the barbarian countries like Babylon and Assyria and Persia and those people to come and take them into captivity. So they were taken away in 586 BC by the Babylonians, and then they returned about, I don't know, if it was 50, or 70 years, right? So then when they came back, it was, I think it was Cyrus who allowed them to build a temple. I may be getting some parts of the story out of order, but, bear with me because most of my research is locked up in my computer. My computer's crashed. So I'm doing all these things from memory, just off the top of my head. I have a few hard copy books and some notes, but the majority is from memory. But back to the idea that the post-exilic era is when this King Cyrus allowed the Jews to return from Babylon after they came from captivity, and he also built them a temple, right? So they became the dominant culture under the Persian king. So the story goes, the legend goes, as they were rebuilding this temple, that the prophet Ezra found the books of Moses. He found Deuteronomy and all that other stuff. He discovered them and then proceeded to present this law to the people, which up until then was unheard of. So even people back then were suspicious. It's like, okay, it was more of a colonization by Persia, and it looked like Ezra was a Persian agent, more of a politician than a prophet. So, and then you see a lot of strange kind of cultural strictures coming to be enacted that were more like a kind of Persian apartheid than a real religion. And the people rebel. So the point is, the whole Deuteronomic history, the books of Moses and all that kind of appeared at one time. And most scholars by now believe that it was Ezra who actually wrote those. But I'm going to continue in the next part because my memory's getting low. So this is the end of part 5. Peace.